So a quick overview of today's agenda. We will be opening with some opening remarks from Eike at GIZ, followed by an update on our work in the RPP manufacturing industries. Next, Stephen Duce from Hardscape will share a case study on their work. After that, we have Paige from Small World, who will present a case study on their work, followed by a video featuring their supplier, Nancy, who will share some of her perspective as a supplier. We then will move on to do the pilot project work, where Mansi will talk a bit on her work done in India. And then I will open the floor for a few minutes for Q&A. And finally, I will close with sharing some resources from the RPP project. Next, please. So handing over to Eike Feddersen now, Senior Project Manager at IGS, for the opening remarks. Welcome, Eike.
Thank you, Melissa, and it's a great pleasure to being here today. A very warm welcome also from my side. As Melissa said, I work for the Initiative for Global Solidarity, which is a project implemented by the GIZ on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And at IGS, the IGS was set up with a goal to support companies in the effective implementation of human rights and environmental due diligence. And at the heart of that effort is the principle of shared responsibility between buying and supplying companies. And the key to making this relationship work, quite simply, responsible purchasing practices. So what is our role in this initiative with the ETI? We have been quite proud to support the development of principles for responsible purchasing practices in manufacturing industries. And this builds on our broader engagement with major multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Fair Wear Foundation, the Responsible Business Alliance, the Fair Labor Associations, in which we help companies to improve how they source and how they buy. One very concrete example that we supported is the so-called Learning and Implementation Community, the LIC, which is part of the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices, a platform that was set up in the textiles industry that brought together brands, retailers, and supply chain partners to drive practical improvements, really to apply the framework. And also, because we know this was a voluntary or is a voluntary framework, we wanted to see how we can make the progress measurable. And also to some extent hold purchasing companies accountable thereby. So we supported the development of a complementary framework as well. It's the Purchasing Practices HRDD framework, which directly builds on the findings of the common framework. So why is all of this important for us? At the IGS, we have seen again and again that purchasing practices can deeply affect sustainability and working conditions across supply chains. Here's a quick summary of what we have learned. Melissa, next slide, please. So what we see here is that purchasing decisions often create price pressure and tight lead times. They reinforce unequal power dynamics between buyers and suppliers. For suppliers, this means cash flow delays, operation strain, and eroding profit margins. And while for workers, the consequences can be quite severe, being excessive overtime, low or delayed wages, and unrealistic production pressures. In turn, these issues also pose business risks, such as reputational damage, quality concerns, delayed orders, and perhaps most importantly, a breakdown of trust with your most important business partner, actually. With the adoption of the CSDDD, the importance of responsible purchasing practices has only grown, as it's explicitly mentioned. And no matter where Omnibus will bring us, it's certain it will remain in there. So while we already know quite a lot about the link between purchasing practices, working conditions, and business risks, we have also realized that we need more pilots and we need to scale what works. And that is why we have expanded our work together with the ETI into other manufacturing sectors beyond textiles. And while coming now to this landmark moment, I must say we're quite impressed with the results from this collaboration. The principles that have been developed are not just comprehensive, but they are practical, and they're highly relevant for companies that want to drive real change in how they purchase. What we saw, what was really important, was the development process itself. We saw very strong stakeholder engagement, and that has really deepened our collective understanding of how purchasing practices impact workers and suppliers in complex industrial settings, again, beyond the textile industry. And obviously, we know also that each sector brings its own challenges, and so we have to explore that further. But we already see that this process has moved us forward in quite a meaningful way. So let me close with a few thank yous. A big thank you to Melissa for leading this work with such commitment and insight. It has been a real pleasure. And of course, a heartfelt thanks for all participating companies, for your engagement throughout this journey, for the trust, for the openness to really discuss this challenging topic and to really look into how to make change happen. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today. I look forward to hear about the principles, the pilot projects, and how we can drive meaningful change together. So let's build on what we have learned, and let's take the next steps towards more equitable and sustainable supply chains. Thank you very much. And back to you, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Eike. And it was also a pleasure working with you. And thanks for sharing such a powerful message. If you could go to the next slide, please. So let's dive a bit deeper into the project and what we have been doing, the progress that the company's made, as well as some learnings. Next, please. I wanted to start with the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices. Eike already briefly mentioned it, and many of you might be already familiar with it, but it is especially important for today's webinar because a lot of work in our project was based around this framework. For those who aren't familiar with it, the Common Framework was developed in 2022 by ETI, Ethical Trade Norway, PSD, and the Fair Wear Foundation. And in short, it is a reference document. It's meant to be a common language for what good purchasing practices look like. It's not an accountability mechanism. It's not a certification. It's a practical tool for companies, policymakers, and MSIs to use to have better conversations with suppliers and other stakeholders. And the aim is to find realistic solutions that work for both business and suppliers, ultimately leading to better working conditions for workers. The framework, as you can see, is built around 5 overarching principles, with principle 1 looking at internal integration, so looking basically how purchasing practices are managed internally. Principle 2, equal partnership. The focus is on mutually respectful, having open and transparent sourcing dialogues and sharing responsibilities. Collaborative production planning is principle 3. Fair payment terms and contracts, principle 4. And lastly, principle 5, sustainable costing, looking at costing mechanisms to support living wages and sustainable production. Next, please. So what have we been working on? In June 2023, we began a project with a group of manufacturing companies to explore how the Common Framework can be applied beyond the garment and textile industry, and looking at how applicable the framework is, but also to see what challenges come up when trying to implement challenges and improving purchasing practices in those industries. The industries included stone, electric vehicles, solar, beauty, home accessories, so a very diverse group of stakeholders. The project ran for 21 months and was funded by IGS and GIZ. And over this time, we held a session focused on each principle of the Common Framework. We also ran exercises like the procurement mapping exercise, risk assessments, review of critical paths, and the supplier survey. One key turning point for many companies was this supplier survey. And this was a bit unusual because typically suppliers are not only asked about their own practices, not about how they're treated by buyers. And this time we asked suppliers to rate the purchasing practices of the companies they supply to. And the survey was based around the Common Framework and covered each of its principles. It was anonymous to make sure suppliers felt safe and to respond honestly. We received in total 92 responses, of 92 responses from 92 suppliers that employed over 84,730 workers. The survey didn't just ask whether certain practices were happening, but also how those practices affected the supplier's business, and in turn, how that influenced working conditions. And why this was important, because it really gave companies a mirror to see how their own behavior impacts suppliers. And that insights helped then again to spark conversations across commercial teams, leadership, and supplier relationship, paving the way for like real change in RPP. Next to that, we also ran 5 pilot projects in Bangladesh, India, and China, which we will talk a bit more on. As you can see here, at the beginning of the project, we started with a baseline assessment to understand how far companies believed they had come in improving their purchasing practices already. Throughout the project, they worked in various aspects of purchasing. And then at the end, we carried out an online assessment. And here you can see the progress that the companies made over time. As you can see, there was quite a significant progress made in principles 1, integration, 2, equal partnership, and 3, collaborative production planning. Some companies also made steps forward on fair payment terms and contract terms, as well as sustainable company costing, but not in great masses. So I will show a bit more on each principle's results now. If you can go to the next slide. So principle 1, integration, where we saw one of the strongest improvements. So companies took several actions here, like using the supplier survey to evaluate their practices, conducting risk assessments, forming cross-functional teams to ensure human rights considerations are part of their everyday purchasing decisions. Some outcomes that we saw here was a better understanding of human rights risks in supply chains, more senior leadership involvement with sales managers and directors visiting suppliers and engaging in meaningful discussions. Also better internal collaboration with clearer goals and more resources to improving purchasing practices. Next slide, please. So equal partnership, we saw some good improvements in this area as well. So a number of companies said that they're now having more open, more frequent conversations with suppliers, including more regular meetings, more online video calls, which has really helped strengthen communication and trust. Some companies also improved how they work through challenges by introducing new formats for quality control and remediation. And others also created formal exit strategy policies to at group level. Next, please. So collaborative production planning was an area where many companies did not do any work before. We saw a big shift here. So many companies started tracking production delays and aligning more closely with critical path, extending lead times and improving sampling efficiency, and sharing long-term forecasts with suppliers to help them better plan their production schedules. Next, please. On fair payment terms and contract terms, at the start of this project, some companies indicated they're already doing things in this space, so mostly on improving payment timelines. But throughout the project, they made some further progress as strengthening their code of conducts, so shifting towards more balanced two-way agreements, improving payment timelines and resolving customer complaints to prevent delays, reviewing payment terms across business units for consistency, and advocating for payment terms with suppliers to ensure that the terms benefit everyone in the supply chain. Next one. And then lastly, we come at principle 5, sustainable costing. And this one was a bit trickier due to given the short time frame of this project, as this was quite an area where it's like early stages for many companies. But we did see some progress. Companies started to doing research into the living wage gaps and discuss fair wages with suppliers. One company even piloted a pricing model that directly incorporates labor cost into production pricing. So this was a brief overview of what progress was made by companies. If we can go to the next. So what we did was then ask suppliers what they thought of the project and the progress made so far. So towards the end of the project, we sent an online survey to suppliers, and keeping in mind that the time frame between the first survey, March 2024, and then this last one, January 2025, was relatively short for companies to implement changes, we still wanted to measure whether suppliers noted any improvements. So as the results showed, 57% of the suppliers reported quite significant change in improvements in communication with their customers. 49 saw significant improvements in how purchasing decisions were made, and 54% said that their relationship with their customer has improved, which are quite positive results. If you can go to the next slide. So for those who reported seeing changes, we asked them to describe these changes in their own words, and here are a few comments from those suppliers on what they shared. So I'm going to pick out a few. Communication more frequently and ask for thoughts and suggestions of suppliers more than before. Our customer give more feedback on the market and bestsellers, and they send us a copy of Critical Path to show when orders will be sent to help us plan our production accordingly. Now they have a better understanding about our products and considerable to labor-intense handmade products. So these are a few comments from suppliers that they've mentioned on the changes of BP. Next, please. We then asked suppliers whether these changes had any impacts on workers. And here's what some of them shared. So good, as we avoid some stressful situations at the factories. Workers have less stress, less overtime due to stable list, and are happier at work. For employees, stable salary from a positive cycle has profound significance. Better communication and quick problem solving is helpful on the working followings, and better working environment and build a better dialogue between workers and the buyer's expectations. So even though this time frame of brands implementing changes on PP was relatively short, positive changes were clearly felt by a big percentage of suppliers. Next, please. Now let's walk through some key observations from this project. So what we saw was challenges without supplier relationship. And like one major challenge we saw was how difficult it is to implement responsible purchasing practices when companies don't have direct relationship with their suppliers. And this was particularly true in sectors like renewable energy or electric vehicles and outdoor furniture, because without knowing who their suppliers are or how they operate, it was almost nearly impossible to assess risk or make meaningful improvements. Also, power imbalances. So we found that power dynamics can be a big barrier. So larger companies usually have more control in negotiations, which leaves like smaller suppliers with very little room to push back. That said, in some cases, buyers felt that they didn't have much leverage, especially when dealing with large suppliers or suppliers who were far removed down the supply chain. And the important takeaway here is that companies still have some influence and they can use it to drive better practices within the parts of the system that they can reach. Also pressure in B2B partnerships. So we saw that some of the companies are working with big retailers or public agencies, often face like serious pressure on keeping costs down. And that can make it tough to push for fair wages or better working conditions at supplier level. But what we saw was that if you start and have these honest conversations with clients about pricing and timeline, it can build a more sustainable way forward. A holistic view of RPP. So RPP is not just about systems, it's about people. For example, reducing overtime is a good goal, but if that leads to lower income for workers without an adjustment in wages, it can really harm, especially when those workers currently rely on that overtime. And that's why changes to purchasing practices need to be thoughtful through meaningful engagement and always consider how they impact workers themselves. And then lastly, scaling and regulating RPP. So for RPP to really remove the needle, it needs to be adopted at scale. Right now, many companies hold back because they are afraid of raising costs and losing business, supplier worries too. And that's where regulations can become very important. Creating this level playing field through clear rules and standards would really help ensure fair competition and drive broader progress across industries. And next one, please. And then my last slide on this is some key of successes. So what we saw is that the principles of the CFRPP are broadly applicable. At the beginning of the project, many companies were skeptical about the relevance of the common framework for their industries. Some felt that their purchasing practices didn't align or that they had little influence over suppliers due to power dynamics. But by shifting the focus from assessing risks within suppliers' operations to examining risks created by their own purchasing practices, companies realized that these principles were highly applicable. So key elements like production planning, payment terms, sustainable costing, partnership are universally applicable, even if the way they're applied might look a little different depending on the context. Meaningful stakeholder engagement. So one of the most important lessons was the value of truly engaging with suppliers. It just gave companies a clearer view of how their purchasing practices impact the people they rely on. Embedding RPP. So for RPP to be effective, it requires involvement from all parts of the business, not just sustainability or human rights teams. So companies that engage in cross-functional teams involving sales, leadership, purchasing, just saw faster progress. Also, when leadership was actively engaged, they could allocate like the necessary resources and support, leading to better improvements. And supporting HRDD. So one major shift during the project was changing the dynamic of how HRDD issues are addressed. So rather than placing the entire burden on suppliers, RPP encouraged a more collaborative approach when purchasing companies took responsibility and offered support. And this then led to improvements such as workers receiving formal contracts where they previously hadn't. But by building supportive, collaborative relationships, suppliers became more open to addressing HRDD issues and leading to better outcomes for workers and a stronger supply chain. Next, please. So I have a video from Stephen. He could unfortunately not be here today, but he wanted to share something him and his team have been actively working on. Al, could you please get the video up?
Hi there, I'm Stephen Duce. I'm the operations manager at Hardscape, and we are a hard landscape and material supplier, and we supply concrete, natural stone and paving to public realm schemes up and down the UK. Now, we first started looking at the procurement principle number 2 regarding equal partnership, and it sounded wonderful in theory, and many businesses like to treat their suppliers fairly, ethically and collaboratively, but equally is a word that's rarely considered to apply to most supplier-buyer relationships. Now, we sent out a supplier survey to 30 suppliers and barely got enough responses to analyse, but the feedback scored well with many scoring as advanced. But on close analysis, we found some of the responses were not as supportive as we thought. There were comments on sample cost, audit completion time, and inability to understand the supplier code of conduct. So we stepped back and really looked at each of these areas and tried to make some big changes. So can you go next slide, please? So the supplier code of conduct. Well, we originally had a termination of supplier notice, and it warned people of a breach of the ETI, and it was very prescriptive. So we decided to update the code of conduct and take out large phrases, that seem to be demanding from customers and suppliers. And we said our business must satisfy Hardscape, be prepared to engage in the processes outlined below, enable us to meet and demonstrate the implementation of the ETI-based code principles. And it went on, and we thought we'd never talk to somebody like that in real life. So why would it be acceptable language when addressing a supplier through a policy, especially when English might not be their first language? So our supplier code of conduct is now our plainer language, which is more about our business vision, our ethics and our commitments. And then we ask the suppliers to do the same, rather than demanding action be taken out of fear of cancelling suppliers. We stated what our business would do first and lead by example, and offered support at every stage. This was followed up sometimes with phone calls, video meetings to ensure they were fully understood. Next slide. We next looked into the audits that we created. They were very detailed, 31 questions rating the performance of a supplier in all areas. The suppliers felt they were excessive, increased admin workloads, increased stress and pressure on staff. Many of our suppliers were small businesses and didn't have the resources when it came to the compliance or admin, or even an understanding of what it was about. So we changed the audits. Next slide, thanks. And the audits now have a selection of potential questions. These can be targeted on the salient issues, previous non-conformances, and rotate with each audit. They're very open questions, inviting engagement, two-way conversation, and asking what they think their issues would come from as well, and offering support, if practicable, with a much more two-way level of conversation. And we even began to train directors and sales managers to gather info during visits, so we didn't duplicate on the audits. And from that, at the end of each audit and the two-way supplier questionnaire, we asked them how they thought we were doing as a customer. And that was probably the biggest change we actually made. Ensures we regularly check our practices are fair and consistent, and we're not stepping over the line of away from equal partnership into a dictatorship. So these feedback questions specifically targeted impacts which have a negative effect on the supplier's employees and aim to reduce unintended consequences of poor purchasing practices. For example, limiting changes to orders, giving more advance notice of orders, to make sure there was no production disruption, increasing efficiencies. And that improves suppliers' profit margins as well, which then goes on to their staff. So for a small company, this can have a huge effect on their employees. Next slide, thanks. And you can see, from here, some of the simple questions, very open, and it really gives us a sense of this is a two-way partnership between us and the suppliers. Next slide. And one of the things that we brought up about samples. Now, the samples from our stone suppliers are very different than what you see in many other businesses. Ours are only 100 by 100 mil, 20 millimeter thick squares of different stones in multiple types, finishes and colours. So when we ask for samples, we actually pay for them. So we thought, there's no issue there. However, although we pay for them, the supplier has to make them. They have to stop production. They have to change tooling sometimes, cut to size that aren't standard for them, package them up, send them out. And if we were asking for samples every month, suppliers are losing production time, reducing efficiency, losing profitability, same again, increasing stress, and all those things that filter down towards staff wages and conditions. So we decided, next slide, thanks, to purchase a new stone saw and create a new sample lab in-house, where we can make samples from waste materials, use offcuts, large paving blocks, and we can do that at short notice in-house. So in that materials lab, we can now show larger volumes of samples, increase the number of samples we ask for each time when we have to get them off a supplier. But also it means that it reduces waste materials, speeds up sample deliveries to customers, and cuts down on admin. It's now become a great focal area for visitors to our factory, so it's a win-win-win-win solution. And our suppliers, on the back of all these changes, we thought we had some fantastic positive responses, so we wanted to engage with them more and really make it feel like we were truly equal. So we invited them to a key industry event in the Excel at London, where we created a village for the suppliers. So all our suppliers exhibited together side by side, supported by our sales team. And all this work helped to listen more to our suppliers, engage with them, understand their businesses, to make their lives easier, which ultimately benefits their employees' pay conditions and well-being. And we'll continue to review our suppliers' needs and our own practices, as we know, never take the suppliers for granted, and make sure we treat them as a true partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I think what stands out about Hardscape story is how they truly listen to their suppliers And even if you have assumptions about like how your industry works, engaging with crucial stakeholders, because without that engagement, you might be wrong of making the wrong assumptions and decisions. So thank you, Stephen, for sharing that story with us today. If you can go to the next slide, please. Then I'd like to hand over to Paige from Small World, who will share a bit more about the work they have been doing as part of this project. Paige, over to you.
Morning. Next slide, please. So Small World Accessories, we are a fashion accessories business in the UK retailers so for example, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Next. So we work through a concession model. We work closely with 8 factories in China and 1 in India. So next slide, please. So when we started the Responsible Purchasing Practice Project, we identified several issues through the supplier survey results. Some we were aware of and some were a bit of a surprise to us. With the first factory surveys completed in March 2024, gave us a starting point for conversations with our factories. So the main categories of purchasing practices that came up through the survey results that needed the most improvement were product design and development process, communication and collaboration, and sampling and forecasting. These issues were also linked to labour rights risks, including excessive working hours, reliance on temporary workers and subcontracting. And I'll be honest, we didn't fully appreciate the impact that the workers were having on inaccurate forecasts for yearly orders. Our biggest challenge was critical path adherence, changes to product design after orders were placed, not taking full responsibility for subsequent delays, including excessive sampling. We were glad to have the opportunity to participate in the pilot program with 2 of our factories. We gained a lot of deeper insights into our purchasing practices and the impact that we had directly on the workers. We were able to gain direct communication with the workers through interviews and focus groups to better understand their working conditions and assess the impact of our purchasing decisions on those workers specifically. So through those detailed discussions, factories highlighted areas of improvement, and we were able to have a clear direction to enhance our purchasing practices. We thought we were working in a mutually beneficial way, but in reality, things were quite different. We hadn't created that time and space for honest feedback from our factories, from our agent, and from all of our workers. But we now, throughout the process, do fully understand the impact of our decision-making on our suppliers, including the workload, the stress, cash flow issues. So we came up with a little thing for internally. So communication, we want to build on trust and loyalty. We want to consult rather than tell, and collaborations that we can make change together with our factory, our agent, and our UK teams. Next slide, please. So going into a bit more detail of the specific changes that we've made throughout the project. Our buyers, designers, and our sourcing team have all been involved. It's been a collaborative project throughout the whole of our business, and we understand and appreciate the benefits and the consequences of not sticking to our new process. So the immediate changes that we made were a need to improve our design and product development hit rate. We recognise that we need to design widely due to our trends and things. But we're now working with a design spec selection and sign-off process. So instead of sending out hundreds and hundreds of designs to be sampled, we're ensuring that they're more targeted. We have monthly sample packs with an extra week for sampling that the factories were explaining sometimes. Certain materials take longer than others to get in. So we factored all of that into our new, on our new sampling process. So it means there's more time for them to source the correct fabrics. They can discuss techniques with us if they think there's changes that should be made before they make a sample, whether it be cost implications or anything like that. So that is helping us increase or reduce our hit rate. We're currently working at about a 60% hit rate, and our target is 30. So we're hoping that over time this will reduce pressure and stress on the sample team workforce. Throughout discussions that we had with workers, they were wondering why certain products were ordered and some weren't. They were worried that it was where maybe that their quality wasn't quite as good, but in theory we just sampled way too much and we weren't ever going to buy all of that. So our design selection process, we have seen a reduction in excessive sampling already, which we will hopefully in time we can work to reduce overtime and the pressure and unnecessary stress on those workers. The second point was extending lead times to 10 weeks following a full critical path review with each factory and our agent. So we've looked at capacity building. So due to an increase in business throughout 2024 and now 2025, we didn't want to go and find new factories. We wanted to consolidate our additional business with the factory bases, and it was important that they benefited from the increase in business but had time to build on their capacity. We reviewed the process with them. We went through factory lead times on specific products. So how long did certain sourcing of materials make, manufacturing, internal, external processes, and packing, which between us and our factories, we've now reviewed our whole critical path and have managed to agree some lead times that we're all working towards. And hopefully over time, we will be able to see a reduction in that overtime and create an annual projection for each factory. The next process was our best practice internally. So we need to make sure that we were raising orders from approved samples. We weren't amending orders or amending samples once orders were placed. We were working through new contracts with our factories, so we will accept responsibility if those changes do need to be made. We work to a monthly sign-off, a monthly order raising and transparent forecasting with each factory so they can manage their workforce accordingly. And we've noticed more open and transparent discussions since the pilot project. Workers and factory owners are able to come to us with any issues they have. Throughout all of this, we need to identify the cost savings. So with the excessive sampling, obviously we weren't paying for samples every time, and that was included in the cost prices of products. So now we're not doing that. We're working with our factories on how those costs savings can be shared with everyone in that supply chain, and looking at supporting the increase in living wages. A change that we made was ensuring all of our permanent factory workers had signed contracts and that they understood those contracts and they weren't just a piece of paper that they'd signed, like they actually understood their hourly rate, their overtime rates, and how to actually understand that their pay slips that they were getting as what was actually what they were meant to receive every month or week. Next slide, please. So our next steps that we're working on over the next year. So looking at our learnings so far throughout the RPP project and the pilot programs, we have seen improved supplier relationships with clearer critical path planning and more transparent discussions. We've gained greater visibility into our supply chain. So we now seem to have much more clearer visibility on our subcontracting, understanding the challenges and opportunities within our second and third tier suppliers. And our next steps for 2025 and beyond. So in-depth factory forecasting, looking at making order placement even throughout the year. So we're taking advantage of the low season production windows, reducing the reliance on overtime. But again, we don't want to have a negative impact on workers. We want to address the excessive overtime, but we don't want to reduce the wages that they're actually taking home. And our factories, we aren't the only brand that work with those factories. So we need to look at how we can collaborate with other brands who also work with those factories. We're going to continuously monitor and measure our buying practices. So an internal RPP training for new starters and external or other teams throughout the business. We're looking at implementing a factory assessment, so a yearly review, and consider how we can reward good and improved labour conditions. Price negotiation is a big one for us. We want to look at how we can pull in like a best practice. We've started making progress understanding like the labour cost within the product cost. So it's breaking down those costings, having open costings and transparent discussions with each factory throughout the negotiation process. Reviewing and amending our internal contracts. So we have contracts with each factory, looking at how we can amend those to be like a tripartite code of conduct, including our purchasing practices, and using a contract to build cooperation between the supplier, our factory, and the agent. And yeah, that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Paige. I think what stood out to me about Smallworld throughout this project was their commitment to ensuring all voices were heard. So they consistently were working with their agents, suppliers, workers, making decisions collaboratively to find solutions that benefited everyone. Now I have a short video from Nancy Han, one of Smallworld's suppliers, where she shares her perspectives on this project. Thank you, Al.
Hello, everyone. This is Nancy from Qingdao Jinyu Xiang Jewelry. Today, I would like to share about the ETI results with all of you. Hello. Thank you. So actually, there are some obvious changes, and I would like to share with you. And firstly, Smallworld share the market response and the best sellers with us. Secondly, they improve the sample development hitting rate. So for all the styles they developed with us, they increase the hitting rate from 30 to or 40% to 60%. And thirdly, for different styles, such like they want to, for the whole project, they want to develop 12 letters. Now they reduce to 1 or 2 letters, and we develop the 1 or 2 letters firstly, and then they see the samples. After the order confirmation, they ask us to make the left letter styles. So that can reduce the material and effort waste greatly. And fourthly, the order lead time has been extended from 8 weeks to 10 weeks and give us more flexibility. And fifthly, they share the order forecast with us, and they give us the estimated order volume monthly. Okay, firstly, they reduce the development cost and minimize the oversampling rate. And secondly, the longer lead time can let us for the better production planning and reduce overtime work. And thirdly, the order forecast can help us optimize our production schedules and preventing order pile-ups like this. Yeah. Yes, the sharing the market insights help us to our designers and our workers to understand the market well, and so they can develop better styles to which are proper for the market. And secondly, more reasonable production schedules reduce our overtime work and improving the work-life balance and worker satisfaction. And thirdly, the auditors come to visit us and give us a lot of suggestions regarding the working conditions and working environment, and which can help us to grow quickly. And when the other customers visit us, and they would like to give us more orders, so we get more business. Actually, all the above improvements give we are beneficial, especially for sharing the market data and best sellers, and also providing the order forecast. Other brands, I have to, if I have to say, then I want to ask the other brands to learn from small words, like for the below 2 points. One is sharing the order forecast, and secondly, improving the development hitting rate. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And when I asked Nancy at the end of our conversation what messages she would share with others, she said she wished more companies would work this way. So truly helping them plan better, which support both the business and the workers, really showing equal partnership. Next slide, please. Oh, here, this up already. So now moving on to the pilot project work that we've done. In total, as already said, we've done 5 pilot projects. Next, please. Sorry. So in India, Bangladesh, and China. And the purpose of these pilots was really to engage directly with workers through individual interviews and focus group discussions, really understanding current working conditions and explore whether workers notice the impacts of specific purchasing practices on their workload and well-being. And the idea was then for the company and the supplier to collaboratively identify and address those issues, building a more supportive and sustainable way working together. Next, please. So what we saw was that workers' awareness of specific companies' purchasing practices varied depending on their roles and seniority. So for instance, someone working in the sampling room might know which products belongs to which brand, or general manager might be more aware about a specific timelines of a specific buyer, whereas a production line worker might not have that insight. So overall, workers' observations of specific company practices were often limited. But what was really clear was that the impacts of irresponsible purchasing practices on working conditions. So urgent or increased orders often increase pressure, leading to overtime and even small injuries, or that tight production schedules cause stress, which again resulted in overtime or hiring temporary workers. Last-minute changes to timelines increased stress, often led to errors or more overtime. And technical and quality demands also added pressure, and in some cases also contributed to small accidents. And all of this clearly shows that workers don't always know the company behind the order, but they do feel the effects of how those orders are placed and managed. I'm going to hand over to Mansi right now, who will share a bit more about the pilot project she facilitated in India. We will be running the session a bit over the 10 minutes, I'm afraid. So, but I hope you guys can stay along. Over to you, Mansi.
Thank you, Melissa, and a very good morning and afternoon to everyone. I represent Colors Consulting. We're a research and advisory practice based in Bangalore, and currently we work at the intersection of gender, business, and human rights across various industries. So for the purchasing practice pilot, ETI partnered with us to provide on-ground technical assistance to a stone supplier in Gwalior in the state of Madhya Pradesh in India. Our goal over there was to understand how brand purchasing practices impact supplier operations and the working conditions. This involved two key on-site engagements with them, one in August 2024 to establish a baseline, and another one in January 2025 to provide technical assistance. During our baseline interactions with the workers, several key issues were identified. Firstly, the workers had limited awareness of how customer purchasing practices impact their working conditions. However, they were able to identify factors that contributed to overtime, such as delays in receiving raw materials, peak seasons, sudden orders which were received by the suppliers, as well as unclear staffing needs that existed in their workplace. Another issue was workers' access to health insurance, especially when it came to employee state insurance, which is mandatory in India, as workers were not aware of its benefits. Moreover, these benefits did not cover the temporary workers at the supplier side, leaving them vulnerable to health issues, and especially those which were unrelated to workplace injuries. There were also concerns about workplace safety because while the workers had safety equipments, there was inconsistent training which posed risks for them. And this does highlight the need for structured training, which did not exist at the supplier side. On the operations side, the grievance redressal systems were also largely informal in the facility with limited access for new and especially temporary workers. And finally, many workers did lack formal contracts with the company they worked with, which was primarily also because there were low literacy levels. However, this did affect their job security and their overall understanding of their rights. Shifting to the feedback we received from the suppliers during baseline, the suppliers did note that the customers frequently missed timelines, leading to production disruptions and financial strain for them. Secondly, they highlighted issues related to incorrect technical specifications and inefficient sampling, which added to their operational inefficiencies. Thirdly, there were inaccurate forecasts and insufficient capacity planning, making it difficult for suppliers to offer long-term contracts to their workers, as well as the suppliers shared that extending payment timelines in terms of the payments that they received from maybe 60 days to 120 days without any prior information to them forced them to rely on borrowing and credit lines, which added additional pressure to their overall financial situation. We'll move to the next slide, please, Melissa. So in order to address these challenges which were identified during the baseline, the customer company took several key actions to improve their procurement practices. These included, firstly, focusing on improving forecasting accuracy by introducing a material type projection model. Secondly, they reduced uncertainty and improved planning by increasing engagement with the supplier by scheduling quarterly procurement meetings in order to provide clear demand projections, streamlining production and workforce management at the supplier end. The third thing they did was to prioritize timely payments, addressing financial strain for the suppliers by exploring opportunities to extend payment terms, and they also ensured more predictable and timely payments. And lastly, this is a bit different from the other purchasing practice improvements they made. That is, they provided training support and technical support to the suppliers to strengthen their human rights commitments. This included areas such as grievance redressal, health and safety, hiring policies, and social security. The technical assistance process based on the actions which the customer wanted to take took place in the month of January 2025, and several key decisions came out of this process at the end of the supplier. These included formalizing a comprehensive health and safety policy, where they decided to focus on risks such as dust, noise, and machinery, which are very key to the stone industry. They also attended a training of trainers program, especially for the management team, that would further enable them to provide consistent health and safety trainings for all the workers. The supplier also agreed to extend employee state insurance benefits to all workers, including the temporary workers who were initially not covered under the ESI scheme. They also wanted to promote worker well-being, and for this, the management team at the supplier end decided to integrate regular health-related trainings in their schedule, focusing on stress management, hygiene, ESI benefits awareness, and they also scheduled a health checkup camp for the workers as well as for the families. On the operational side, again, the supplier recognized that there was a need to formalize their grievance redressal system. They agreed to draft a policy as well as establish a structured committee with representation from both management and the workers' side, which is in compliance with the legal requirements in India. And lastly, they focused on having quarterly town hall meetings, which were planned to promote open communication and dialogue between management and workers. We move to the next slide, please, Melissa. So having participated in the responsible purchasing practices pilot, the supplier acknowledged the efforts from the customer side, and they also highlighted certain broader challenges where they emphasized that the manufacturers in the unorganized sector do face significant difficulties due to limited resources and knowledge gaps that exist, especially when it comes to the legal requirements and fair labor practices. Initiatives to improve these requirements do require financial and time investments as per the supplier, which should be recognized through longer business commitment from workers, ideally for at least 2 to 3 years, is what the supplier strongly felt. They also stressed on the need for a shift in the industry mindset, as many buyers for them still prioritize low pricing, putting pressure on suppliers to still be able to meet health, safety, and labor standards. Finally, the supplier also highlighted that the responsibility for these changes should not fall on 1 or 2 customers, but should be shared collectively across the industry. We'll go to the next slide, please. So what we learned from the pilot is that stakeholder engagement is quite essential for driving effective change. By actively listening to both sides, suppliers and workers, as well as the buyers, we were able to build trust and uncover the root causes of the challenges that exist in supply chains, rather than just addressing surface level issues. As the supplier who participated in the pilot also shared that this is the first time that a customer reached out in such a way to have a dialogue and a meaningful dialogue with them. So while the focus of the responsible purchasing practices pilot, has been on improving purchasing practices, we found strong interconnections with human rights due diligence. So addressing RPPs often does reveal human rights issues, and HRDD practices do help to enhance RPPs is what we found. And here buyers do play a very key role in improving procurement practices, not just for better purchasing, but also for protecting workers' rights, leading to a more sustainable and ethical supply chain. And I would like to, conclude by saying that, ensuring fair labor practices does require a shared responsibility between the customers and suppliers. And there is a strong need for a broader systemic shift, with more buyers incorporating investments in fair business practices and human rights standards into their business decisions. So with that, I'd like to thank you and hand it back to Melissa.
Thank you very much, Mansi, and thank you for sharing these great insights with us today. I will skip the questions for now, and it will be for those who inputted questions. I will share that after you, either through a blog or through a Word document by email. Give me 5 more minutes to close this session. I will be sharing some of the resources with you right now. So as part of this project, we also develop several resources that will be publicly available to help broaden awareness and understanding of responsible purchasing practices. Next, please. So we developed a common framework for responsible purchasing practices specifically for manufacturing industries. In this version, we've reduced apparel and textile language, place greater focus on responsible contracting, including a holistic approach to RPP and a section on living wages. And true to the idea of creating a common language, we translated the framework into Bengali, Hindi, Mandarin, and of course English. So for those interested in these details, an article has been published outlining exactly what has changed. Next, please. So as many of you know, the current version of the CSDDD has seen significant reduction in scope and responsibility. But despite this, responsible purchasing practices remain part of the directive, though maybe limited mainly to Tier 1 now. But as part of this project, we developed a mapping of the first version of the CSDDD against the common framework of responsible purchasing practices. And this work shows how, regardless of how the directive will evolve, RPP remain essential and how companies can use the framework to meet RPP obligations under the CSDDD. Next, please. So as many of you remember, last ETI's Insight webinar, we also carried out a rapid HRDD assessment in mined minerals and metals as part of this project. A full report and a summary version are both available for those who want to have a deep dive into that. Next, please. The case studies shared today are also available on the ETI website if you'd like to explore them more in further detail. Next, please. And we also produced a research report on the outcomes of this RPP project. We've touched base on some findings today, but if you'd like to explore them in more detail, the full report is worthwhile to read. And for those with short time, there's also a summary available. Next, please. So to conclude today's webinar, some key messages of today. First, listen to your partners. True partnership starts with understanding their realities. Second, don't assume something doesn't apply to your business. You won't know until you've asked. The principles in the common framework are relevant across industries, even if how they're applied may look different. And we've seen how RPP can reshape relationship with suppliers and create the space to address broader human rights challenges. And finally, change is possible even within limited spheres of influence. Small shifts in practice can open the door to so much bigger. I want to thank you all for keeping with me for a little longer. A big thank you to the speakers and for you all joining today and your interest in this important work. The next ETI webinar will be coming up in June 2025, so keep an eye out for the invite. Thanks again and wish you all a very wonderful day. Thank you very much.